and you're very welcome to Adapt Radio. My name is Dr. Claire O'Connell, and today we are talking about cyber citizens.
From the Adapt Centre at Trinity College, this is Adapt Radio, presenting groundbreaking innovations, one conversation at a time.
So really, that's what the cyber citizenship is all about, is building a literacy around cybersecurity, an awareness around cybersecurity, but also community practice.
Now, as AI-generated content becomes more widespread and realistic, that increases the risk from things like disinformation, phishing, and social engineering. So in the modern world, we all need to be savvy cyber citizens. And joining us on the podcast today are two experts who do a huge amount of work in this area. Professor Rachel Farrell is Director of the Professional Master of Education programme in the School of Education in University College Dublin, and she's involved in the UCD Centre for Cyber Resilience Education, or CyberWise. And Paul Stanley is the Head of Engagement at Ireland's National Cyber Security Centre. So Rachel and Paul, you are both very welcome to the programme.
Thanks, Stanley. Great to be here.
Yeah, delighted to be here. That's great.
Great. So can I ask you both to start, what kind of cybersecurity changes are we seeing with the rise of AI? I know that's a big question, but do you have any sort of trends or examples you can share with us?
From a national perspective, I suppose in some cases to do with AI and artificially generated things, Ireland has been hit the first in the wave of these things because we're an English-speaking country. So we've had, the scam emails and then the voice messages, and now we're seeing AI generated content and video. That is quite difficult to distinguish from the real thing. So there is this ongoing issue of how do we get the truth all the time. We're finding our NCSE colleagues in other countries where English is not the first language, they're now being hit by, we're talking to our friends in Estonia, and they were saying they're getting genuine scam calls in perfect Estonian now.
Wow.
Because AI is able to generate these things. So again, the principles how to protect yourself for these things is about educating yourself, becoming familiar with how these things are done. And a bit like even just with things like passwords, it's often good for a serious thing to authenticate twice to make sure it genuinely is what it's supposed to be.
Right. So there are two barriers there to the fraudulent stuff getting through to you. And Rachel, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so I think the whole area of cybersecurity in education was a priority even before the kind of proliferation of AI. So as Paul was saying there, like various forms of scams, etc. And they're becoming a lot more prevalent now and harder to detect because of AI. But also within education, there is, I suppose, an expectation now that AI is being used in schools and in universities. And that gives rise to a type of cybersecurity where if there are any free online tools to use, the saying, if the product is free, you are the product. It's opening up a layer then of people divulging very important information, their own data, so that when you are signing up for things, that was always a problem, even with any online tools, that you have to sign up and therefore you're giving away data. So that's an area of concern, that while there are great tools out there to be used, it had to be used with caution in that what are you giving to get. So that's another area that we're very concerned about. And then within all of those things, even apart from AI, just generally any online tools, they're all based on engagement. And, and that's where the social engineering is very important. So again, you're giving away a lot about yourself, but you're becoming engaged in these things and they become addictive as well. So that we view in the education sense, the cybersecurity from a number of different lenses, whether it's the psychological lens or, even the philosophical lens of why are we using these things and are they necessarily, all things are they necessarily good for us? And then we look at the historical lens. We look at our cybersecurity education through, how we can teach it through the curriculum as well.
Right.
So obviously with all that's happening now in AI in the past kind of year and a half, it has heightened those things, but all those things have been there long before AI as well. So
right, but this is turning up the heat on them, I suppose.
Yeah.
I presume like everybody is at risk of being exposed to cybersecurity threats just by virtue of engaging with the digital world. But are there particular groups of people who might be more vulnerable and need a little more protection and maybe a little more education around this?
Definitely. It applies to everybody, even experienced IT professionals can be caught out. Even business administrators who are very careful about how they make financial transactions have been caught out because of how clever these manipulating ways of dealing with people. But certainly there would be a cohort. I think of my own mother, she would have got all those kind of emails saying, oh, I have some money in my bank account I'd like to share with you. And she would often ask me, could that be real? Could that be genuine?
Yeah.
And that, or, scams now are things like you could get an SMS. Oh, Dad, I'm after losing my phone. I need some money. And again, your instant reaction might be, oh, my poor son or daughter is stuck somewhere. Needs help. So it's about that kind of counting to three, say, well, really, would that really, really happen?
Yeah.
A lot of, here in the Cybersecurity Centre, we find a lot of incidents kick off on a Friday afternoon or just before a bank holiday or just coming up to a holiday time, because we know people are in a rush. People maybe want to finish up work.
Right.
It might be, it's the end of month deadline for accounts. There are all these, if anything has a sense of urgency that's a little bit out of the norm, it's something kind of to think twice before you click or approve or give your permission for a transaction to happen.
Yeah, rather than kind of skipping over those checks and balances in your head just because you're in a rush or you want to get out the door or whatever. That's good advice. I suppose the Cyber Citizens project, can you tell me a little bit about that, Rachel? What's the idea behind it?
Okay, so the Cyber Citizen project is coming from quite a number of years of working on cyber security in primary and secondary education. So I might just give you a little bit of a background into it.
Please do.
So in 2019, the NCSE had a working group, and that's when UCD became involved because they needed to include kind of the teacher voice and people working in education. So around from 2019 to 2021, we worked on the development of junior cycle short course for cybersecurity. And that was a very holistic course with different strands. It had a unifying strand that looked at the philosophical implications in cybersecurity, kind of cyber psychology and careers in cybersecurity. And then it looked at then other strands looking at making sense of cyberspace and things like data is a new oil, looking at things through that lens.
Yeah.
And then looking at different things about building kind of security from a school level, individuals, a student council, then, school level. And then looking then at cybersecurity as a kind of a global village, looking at how to manage communication, a crisis, the kind of the regulation, that legislation. So we implemented that in schools across Ireland over a 2-year period. And then we got funding from the Public Service Innovation Fund to look at how we could adapt the junior cycle short course to age and stage appropriate level for primary school.
Okay.
One of our primary school colleagues, the deputy principal, Ciara Malloy in Muckla National School then, said about working with Morel Rice, who would be the project research manager in CyberWise. And we developed 5 strands called Staying Secure Online, Cyber Hygiene, looking at cyber events and cyber careers, and then looking at things like fake versus real, spotting an attack, and then looking at codes and ciphers and encryption. And we're adding a new one now in a current project that we're working with. So we were very lucky to get Research Ireland funding under the Coalesce Fund for a project called Secure. So in that project now, we're increasing the number of schools involved in this, and we're putting all of our 5 micro modules for primary schools onto a platform that's part CPD or professional development for teachers, but then have a package to go in and teach this. So that's kind of the groundwork.
Yeah.
We're adding a new module then about the intersection between AI and cybersecurity.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
We're hopeful then that going forward that we will get funding for a new escalation of this project called Cyber Citizenship, which is an ambitious project then to look at 2 different strands. And one strand is looking at using all of these resources that we've built up over the past number of years and increasing the number of schools, but also working with local libraries and youth organisations, because you're asking about the vulnerable groups. I mean, I think everybody is vulnerable when it comes to cybersecurity. So I think it's education for everybody. And then the other strand then is looking at the people working in public service, government, because it's like any kind of science and computer science and cybersecurity, they are in the field of science and social science as well, that sometimes when there are very high level messages, or if there are people working in government trying to work with people in the everyday sense, the communicating that message can be quite difficult because of the language.
Yeah.
So we want to work with that strand as well, so that we're able to build that community, that everybody is involved. It is underpinned by the student voice and student agency and young people, but we want those young people to have a pipeline to talk to people with influence in government and in public service. So really that's what the Cyber Citizenship is all about, is building that a literacy around cybersecurity, and awareness around cybersecurity, but also community practice with all of these partners involved. So we're hopeful that we're hopeful of funding coming forward for a new project, Cyber Citizenship, working with the UCD Centre for Cyber Resilience Education, the ADAPT Centre, and then also with IDGA Technology and Education and WebWise, and also obviously our esteemed partners in the NCSE.
A word jumped out at me there when you were talking, Rachel, cyber hygiene. I had never heard of that before. Can you give me a synopsis on what that involves?
Yeah, well, maybe Paul might want to come in first with the high-level explanation. I might come in then with what we're doing for
Sure, Paul, tell us about cyber hygiene.
Yeah, sure. And you can see hygiene is, that word is kind of connected with being clean. We're all used to the advice through COVID about, washing your hands and doing it properly and those kind of things. So like one of the things I would find out my own children, they're very good with digital things from the user interface perspective. Mm-hmm. So if you want them to use the remote control for the TV, or you want them to set up an app on your phone, super. But actually to know under the hood of what goes on and how that information is processed, they're not really in that space yet. So again, one of the things as cyber hygiene, or your knowledge of these things increases, as Rachel was mentioning, we often give our data over to a service. Yeah. But we don't really know what happens to it. They know my email address, so what? They know my phone number, so what? They know my birthday. Oh, they know where I live, and so on. And all these bits of information can be put together to build a profile. And sometimes that can be used in a good way, but of course, it can be used in a bad way as well. Yeah. Now, primarily here in the NCSE, our primary remit is to work with critical national infrastructure. So it's big things, the electricity grid to make sure it's on, the water supply, that the transport sector works well, that we can go and do our shopping. We link in with our partners in the central bank to make sure the money systems are working. So we do some things with the ordinary person. So we produced a lovely, lovely booklet with NALA, the National Adult Literacy Agency, to make sure we used appropriate language. And it's found on our website, and it's called How to Keep Your Online Accounts Secure. So we're not really interested in whether your information is photographs, whether it's a blog you're writing. Doesn't really matter to us from that point of view, but it's really important to keep it secure. So that's down to things like having a really strong password, trying to use two-factor authentication. Maybe your phone uses a password and your thumbprint. It's about making sure that information is kept private and you don't sort of leave it on a post-it note stuck on your computer. Those kind of sensible things that you will do to protect those online accounts. Because really that's the future. We're living in a digital society, and that's how we actually swap and share information with one another. Right. And then in other places, we're talking a lot about resilience, which maybe come up later in the conversation.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I suppose, Rachel, what would you add to that? Kind of any other tips on cyber hygiene that you would be imparting too? I suppose, as you say, in the junior cycle curriculum and now in primary as well, what kind of things are you helping young people to get familiar with as good practice in this area?
Yeah, so in our micro module on cyber hygiene, it starts off with kind of a range of key vocabulary, because the language around this is very important that students understand. Like even data, like what is data? Like data is their personal information. And their personal information can be monetized so that if they go on again to download something or to go onto a free app, the cookie settings is very important. So what do cookies mean? And, we make them aware that they're able to go in and change the settings and turn off settings that automatically collect their information. And, with students that get very, engaged in these conversations, they get really shocked when they realise that, that's why when the section's data is a new oil, that their data is their personal information. And their personal information, if they don't set their cookies settings properly, then their data can be sold. That sparks brilliant conversation with the students around those kind of things. And then even about, and how their information is tracked online. So again, we're introducing to a lot of key vocabulary, but also then giving them the tools to go in, and there's lovely games that they can play, or online games that they can go in to see what happens when you do or don't, engage in your settings, and that they have agency to go in and actually change those settings. You don't have to just tick yes to everything. You actually have some agency to do that, but you need to know how to do that. That's what's important.
And make that, 30 seconds or so when you're browsing to actually do it. It can be such a pain to do it when you're kind of scooting around the internet, but it's important that you do.
Yeah.
I suppose they are the types of teaching and learning systems that I suppose are really good in the primary and secondary education. What about when you move out into, as you say, think people like policymakers, managers, leaders, people who need to understand this at a level so that they can translate it into kind of helping other people by making better policy or making sure that their business is secure for everybody, etc. So how do you deal with those kinds of cohorts in the population who need to be more cyber aware?
From a policy perspective, obviously it's understanding the landscape very much. One of the things that happens as we're all living through is that digital products are rapidly evolving. Like if you were to say that, how long ago? 2010, so 15 years ago, would it be possible to have an electric car that's, used it? And we would never thought that possibly could happen, or certainly that it would be on the edge. And then now we have, not only do we have electric cars, but we have connected electric vehicles, which are taking information about where you're driving, how far you're going. GPS will tell you where the car is moving, all of the cameras checking everything. So it's only as these things kind of settle in that we realize actually maybe we need to put a few safeguards around these things so that information is not misused. So the same is true. Like I'm an electric scooter driver, back and forth to the train. And of course, when they came in, it was, this is a cool little thing. But we're realizing now there are actually things we need to do to make sure people are safe, because people get injured using them sometimes. So some of it is to do with what we want the manufacturer to do. And some of it is about the behaviors that we have on how we use it. So, for example, we would from time to time with our colleagues in the Garda be informed of, say, an inappropriate use of an intimate image. Now, that's a terrible experience for the person going through it. So it's again, how do we protect individuals from things like that happening?
Yes.
And sometimes it's only by having policies and laws to govern those things so that they won't be misused.
Right. Okay. So they need to understand that and have that forward look as well. See, and it can be very difficult to tell what AI is going to enable. As you say, even if you kind of, I know like we would tell our kids about the time before smartphones. they look at us as if, how did you even survive? The world changes very, very quickly when these new technologies come along. And certainly in the last few years with AI, we've seen that happen, at a massive scale. So I suppose, is it the same with people like, managers of large organizations and everything? How do you encourage them if they're taking an organizational view? Maybe it's a university or it's a hospital or it's a large company or even a small company. What do you say to people in that position?
I suppose, again, from a housekeeping perspective, like oftentimes we would give the advice, know all the things that connect to the internet. So if you're a little business and you have 5 laptops and you have 6 phones and make sure you know what they are and you've kind of documented them, and then to know what data is on them that your business uses. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when we talk about resilience, well, if the worst happened, and like we've had some folks at the moment, their home got flooded and you lose your laptop and you lose your phone, well, that's a terrible inconvenience. The worst bit is the stuff that's on the laptop and on the phone, the data.
Yes.
So have you a way of backing that up safely, that you can retrieve it again if you need it? These are all the things that kind of build resilience into businesses. Because if a major bank was to go offline for even 5 minutes, probably millions of euros are lost because transactions can't happen. So just the way, a lot of us now, we might have our phone and we'll have it charged, but just to be sure, we'll have a little extra battery pack with us, just in case we get stuck or get delayed. It's a bit like having a spare wheel for your car, that kind of thing, that we have a way of dealing with the problem when it comes along. And then on a much larger scale, say for big organizations, you have 2 things. You have a business continuity plan. What do you do if the usual thing doesn't work? And then you would also have a disaster recovery plan. Well, if it did happen, how do we get it back to the way it should be? And then we practice that every so often, just like the fire service does test training and all it's part of the culture that we should have in our organization.
Yeah. So there's definitely a need for that awareness and preparedness, as you say, no matter what your line of work is or, what you're doing in the world, at some point you're going to be interacting with digital services. So it's so important for that awareness. So I suppose, how many people do you hope to reach through the Cyber Citizenship project? Have you a goal around that, sort of the numbers of school children, of policymakers, of managers, etc.?
We're being very ambitious. And just to kind of follow on from what Paul was saying there and to tie in with that question as well, all the things that Paul is saying there, we want to work with, school-going children, youth organisations, people in public service and government in things like cyber smart academies, where we bring all these people together to discuss all of these issues. So where public leaders will hear from the ground what really is of a concern to, young people and parents. But also then with regard to being prepared, like Paul is saying, that we would have scenario-based simulations so that, and we've done these before, and PwC have worked this before with school principals. There's a lot of work put in advance where there was, fictitious kind of press releases and everything about a cyber attack on a school. And then we had all the various principals and various different people to simulate what it would be like in a school if a cyber attack happened. We want to build capacity with people across various different sectors to be able to have those scenario-based situations so that people can be prepared for their business continuity plans and their disaster recovery plans, and even to unpack what those things mean. And also then we want to have roundtable discussions with people, again, from all the different sectors. And I know there's an annual cybersecurity conference now. One key thing from that was that we need to share information across systems, across countries, because if we're going to build resilience against these ongoing cyber attacks, that really we really have to share. So we want to model that sharing across various different sectors and through regional academies. And that brings it on then to the numbers. We are very ambitious with our numbers. So we will have access to every primary and secondary school in the country through our links with IJA. So they're the Department of Education and Youth Teacher Education Support Service. And so through our links with them. So what we're hoping to do is that through IJA technology in education in particular, that we will have cyber citizen champions in every education centre. There's 21 education centres. So that if we can have a cyber citizen champion in the primary and secondary sector there, that would be able to cascade the learning through there. And all of our resources, we're going to do resource audit, and then we'll have a one-stop shop for resources and activities. There's so many resources and activities out there for primary, secondary and youth organisations that we want to make those accessible to people. So through that, there's 720 post-primary schools in the country, and there's around 3,500 primary schools in the country. So over the 2-year period, we want to try and we won't get to engage every single school directly, but indirectly through our cascading workshops and through our website and various things. We also are looking to have a presence in things like the National Ploughing Championship. So, we are going to have a presence there, have our own stand there to spread the word. And even things like electric picnic. I know for my own children, I'm bringing them down the last couple of years, that there is scope to even have kind of awareness building campaigns in events like that. And also with our links, obviously, with UCD and ADAPT, we have reach in every university in the country. So if there's open days, we would have a presence at all those open days. But the key thing is that we are building capacity with teachers to be able to give them the confidence that they can talk about these things through their curriculum, that this is not an add-on or something that just happens as a by-the-way conversation, that we're looking at linkages across every aspect of the primary and post-primary curriculum where it makes sense to talk about these things. So it becomes a very natural part of the curriculum as well. And then obviously with our various different roundtables and scenario-based events. So we're looking to, at a minimum, reach at least 10,000 direct participants over the next 2 years. And while it does sound ambitious, it is through our large network of partners right across the system that we feel that this is achievable. It's a very important area. It's fundamental. Emerging from the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, some literature suggests that the next pandemic will be a cyber pandemic. And that's not being dystopian. That is a reality. But also what I'd like to say about this project and anything that we do, especially with young children, we do have a pedagogy of hope, that we want this to be something that is not deemed as being dystopian or something that we want to frighten, especially, young people in education. We want to build resilience and look at there are career opportunities here, and there's things that we can build agency that we can, if there are malicious actors out there who are going to cultivate people with talents to do, let's say, hacking for harm, well, we want to cultivate that talent to do, like the pie hackers. We want, there are career opportunities in hacking that is for good to protect. So we want to make young people right from very early stages, and in around 4 classes seen as a very formative time in a student's kind of education development. And that's why we want to get right in at the very early stage and build those good habits and good mindsets that cybersecurity is a fundamental life skill now going forward. But it also can be where people can make a very positive contribution to the local community and to the world at large, so that any skills people have can be used for good.
Absolutely. And I suppose the really nice thing I think about sort of encouraging primary school kids, and as you say, that kind of 4th, 5th, 6th class, that sort of later cycle of the primary school is a very formative time. It's also a great way to get parents and wider families and grandparents and aunts and uncles involved as well. So maybe sort of if people keep an ear out, is my kid coming home mentioning this? Maybe I can talk to them about it too and learn something from them about how to protect myself as well. And to, as you say, to kind of, create this more positive environment where we can all be safe. So I suppose, Paul, maybe you could leave us with your top tip for being a savvy cyber citizen. What should we all go and do right now, this minute, to help us sort of, have a better life online?
Well, I would say maybe 90% of all incidents can be prevented by having, in their terminology, we would say strong authentication, which is proof who you are, which is, as I said, is down to, if it is a system that uses passwords, have a really strong password or passphrase. There's in that booklet I mentioned, there's really good, simple advice on that. Or if you can at all possible, like it's a banking app or something where there is kind of more sensitive information, have multi-factor. So use a PIN code or another thumbprint or whatever it is. Your face maybe uses, your phone might do that. And that will protect a lot of systems from vulnerabilities. Like I said, our work really is to support what Rachel is doing. We're looking forward to helping a little bit in visiting those schools and talking to students, and again, talking about the career path. Because cybersecurity is not just about sitting in front of a computer and hacking things, if you know what I mean. It's also, there's room in there for the work I do, which is about kind of out talking to people about what we can do. It can be things to do with policy, as we said, so some writing and research. There's work in there also with the kind of hardcore technology as well. So there's probably 40 or 50 different professions inside the world of cybersecurity that we're trying to encourage people to work along with. A really nice thing we did, I might just mention at the end, is we've engaged with all the ICT apprentices. That there was about 120 last year that graduated in the civil service. And again, a lot of those have come into the world of cybersecurity. And there's a new tranche as well. So it's an alternative way of getting into the profession. You can go to college and do a degree in cybersecurity, or you can go in the apprenticeship route, which is really good as well. So there's so many positive things about it. I got into computers maybe a little bit later in life. The sky's the limit with what we can do with it. But we need to have those to be careful because of the risks that come along with that as well.
Absolutely. Well, I wish you luck with all of it because it's wonderful. And thank you, Professor Rachel Farrell and Paul Stanley, for joining us today. And if you would like to find out more about the Cyber Citizenship Project, you can find lots of information in the show notes and at www.adaptcentre.ie. That's it for our podcast this time round. Until next time, from myself, Claire O'Connell, Sloan, and thanks for listening.
The Adapt Radio podcast is brought to you by the Adapt Centre at Trinity College, Dublin. Find out more about their extensive research work at adaptcentre.ie. Join us next time to hear about more groundbreaking innovations. To get new episodes automatically, just click the follow button on your player right now. The Adapt Radio podcast is produced by dustpod.io, with episodes monthly on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts.